with a companion.
I'm not done yet. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Revival Press's publication Further On Up the Road by Hugh McFadden. And to kick off proceedings, we have the CEO and Managing Director of Revival Press, Dominic Taylor.
First of all, I'd like to say it is great to be standing here again to introduce a poetry event. I first stood here in April 2003 when Barney Sheehan began what became known as the White House Poetry Revival. And at that time, the idea of holding a weekly poetry reading where everyone who wanted to could read was unheard of in Limerick. There was a few dissenting voices, but the revival became a mainstay of poetry in Limerick for the next 13 years and played host to some of the best local, national and international poets, gaining a worldwide reputation. The White House has always been a unique meeting place for those involved in the arts in Limerick. It has always encouraged good talk and socialising in a comfortable, roomy pub close to the navel of town. Undoubtedly, it is because of those readings back in 2003 that we are here today for the launch of a poetry collection by poet and critic Hugh McFadden. Indeed, the name of our press, Revival Press, is a direct link with those readings, which was called the White House Poetry Revival. Today we launch another book from Revival Press, our 119th title, since we began our community publishing program back in 2009. The book we are launching today is called Further On Up the Road, and indeed we are a lot further on up the road since 2003, and we have lost many of our readers and supporters, including Barney Sheehan, along the way. No more so than recently, one of the champions of the arts, especially the literary arts in Limerick, and that is of course Bertha McCulloch, who I first met back in that April night in 2003. Ever since then, she supported our events, and she was the first face, along with our partner Martine, that I'd look for when we held readings. I always felt that if Bertha was there, we must be doing something right for culture in Limerick. So I'll just leave it at that, and just want to thank all who helped us with the publication of our books, and also the management of the White House for allowing us to launch Hugh's book here today. Perhaps it's time to revive and recreate that literary tradition of the White House and pass it on to future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. And now to launch Hugh's book, we have writer Kieran Beville. Kieran Beville.
I'd like to echo what Dominic said about it being very good, a very good feel to be back in the White House for a literary event. And we're here to launch Further On Up the Road by Hugh McFadden. And the last time I met Hugh was downstairs here when Organic Words was launched. And just to give you some idea of who he is, I think maybe we all know who he is, but just in case and for the camera, Hugh McFadden is a poet and literary critic who worked for many years as a news copy editor with a national newspaper group. He's lived in Dublin for most of his life, but was born in Derry and spent part of his early childhood in Donegal. So that was launched on the 31st of May 2019, I believe, and I don't think, have we had a launch in here since then? No, the pandemic has, that was pre-pandemic. And so here we are again in the spiritual home of poetry in Limerick. And let me just say a general word about poetry. Michael Roberts, poet and editor of the favourite book of modern verse, said that poetry is primarily an exploration of the possibilities of language. That's not meant to be a definition of poetry. If it was, it would be inadequate, but it's an insight into the nature of poetry. And we know that poetry usually has structure, rhythm, rhyme, whether that's assonance or end rhyme, alliteration. And it has a cadence, it has a musicality, and that's why we often like to read poetry aloud. And of course, poetry has a purpose too. I think of one of my own favourite poets, Pablo Neruda. And I would say that some of the poems in Further On Up the Road have a purpose, and they have a political tone without being preachy. And poetry is many things. We could spend all day thinking and talking about what poetry is and what it's not. But it's about the recreation of experience. And I wrote a poem one time called Making Rainbows, and as we all know, I'm sure, the colours of the rainbow are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo and violet. And in my book right now, A Guide to Becoming a Writer, I said something that I think is worth quoting here today. I'm quoting myself now, that's pretty bad, but anyway. A poem is more than the sum of its parts. I think it's relevant to Hugh McFadden's poetry. A poem is more than the sum of its parts. Like white light, it can be broken down into its constituent elements in the spectrum where we see its many hues. But light is not something we actually see. Rather, it is a means by which we see everything else. And the poem, the opening poem of this book is called Further On Up the Road, Redux. And I thought that was interesting. It's from the verb reducere in the Latin, meaning to lead back, or the one who leads back, the one who guides back. And the Romans used redux as an epithet or a descriptive term for the goddess Fortuna. Fortuna redux then is the one who brings another safely home. And it's used in literature. And this is a book that alludes to many writers and to musicians as well. And so I think of John Dryden's Astrea Redux, a poem you'll be delighted to know, a poem on the happy restoration and return of His Sacred Majesty Charles II. Anthony Trollope's Phineas Redux, and John Updike's Rabbit Redux. I wasn't sure about the tone of the opening poem. You know, sometimes I don't always get it. I can be a little bit slow in interpreting a poem. I wasn't sure if the tone was affectionate or sarcastic. I think this could make an interesting discussion later on. But what I think about that is I like it. I like it because it's enigmatic. It has hints and clues, and it takes us on a journey. It takes us on this winding road. It's not straight. He describes it as very dark, not just dark, but very dark, and not just cold, but very cold. But the persona of the poem followed the sun and found the light. And I think there's an optimism coming through there. There's a change of direction and a change of climate, isn't there? And whether that's a physical climate or emotional climate is an interesting question. And I like poems that make me reflect and make me question. And but seemingly it leads to a better place. I wonder to whom it's addressed, of course. In this book as well, I'll return to it in a moment, but we have a lot of music. I don't think I'm remembering them all, but there's Dire Straits, there's Big Bill Broonzy, there's George Harrison, I think, and there's certainly Dolores O'Riordan. There are a number of poets and authors referenced, like W.H. Auden, Paul Durkin, John Jordan, Piers Hutchinson, John Montague, my former teacher, Seamus Heaney, T.S. Eliot, Brendan Behan, Thomas Kinsella, and there's an allusion to Yeats and the dedication or the inscription is a Yeats quotation. And I think there's Joycean characters as well as Miles Nagopoline, Brian O'Nolan, aka Flann O'Brien. So one thing, I was walking down the street recently, and this is what happens to poets. You walk down the street and a phrase or something like that pops into your mind, and I thought, who are the deities in your galaxy of gods? And I think something can start like that, a poem can start like that, or even more than a poem. But who are the deities in your galaxy of gods? There are a number of deities here, I think, in terms of music, in terms of poets and authors, and I'll come back to that point in a minute. It's a colourful book, it's vivid and visual. I've noted greens. I'm a painter, so I notice things like this. Kate, you're a painter, this would pop out to you: green, brown, pink, white. There's nature, the grass and leaves, there's conifer and cherry and apple trees. There's red apples or reddening apples, and there are butterflies are mentioned twice and with great significance as well, I think. We're invited into the poet's world, into Hugh McFadden's world, through these portals where we get glimpses of the man. So it's both visual and oral, and I love that. It's replete with references to writers, as I've already indicated, and in the poem The Great Thirst, we meet some of the frail and flawed writers that Hugh and I and Dominic were talking about just a moment ago. It touches on the relationship between Irish authors and alcohol, a very intimate and important relationship. Yet here we are in a pub for this launch, which was delayed by the pandemic, and delighted I am to be part of this occasion. In the homage to Patrick Kavanagh, you have the first appearance of a butterfly, and it's a sign or a reminder that marvels are seen in the ordinary. What page is that on? Do you remember? I have it, page 12, yeah. And he ends that poem by saying it was a sign, another reminder, marvels are seen in the ordinary. And that's very reminiscent of Kavanagh, isn't it? In the poem, In Memory of My Mother, he says, amongst your earthliest words the angels strayed. And that picks up on that beautiful note and carries it along. In Giving Thanks, he talks about cherry blossoms. I was married back in 1979 in London when the cherry blossoms were in bloom, so I remember them very well. They have a symbolic significance. They are symbolic of spring, a time of renewal, and they speak in a sense about the fleeting nature of life, as their time in bloom is so short. It's only 2 weeks or so, I believe. And this poem, it captures the essence of that brevity. I should have written down the page number of that now. Can you help me out?
Which one is it? Sorry.
The one where you reference. Maybe I'll come back to it. You have a 2-line poem.
Yes, yes.
And
The Journey.
The Journey.
Yeah. About 3 lines. Yeah. Okay.
No, it's after that. It's just after that. What page is that?
That page is 17. Oh yeah, refocus the lens.
Yeah. 17. Yeah.
17.
Yeah. Refocus the lens. Don't be afraid of your human nature. You know, even. Sorry. I'm going to read The Journey. The eternal mystery of a distant corner at the end of a green lane. We all know that, don't we? The eternal mystery of a distant corner at the end of a green lane. We all know that feeling, but here it is. It's articulated and it's profound in its simplicity. And giving thanks Giving thanks is about the cherry blossoms, isn't it? And I did write down the page number for giving thanks. It's good to refer to it if you can.
It's early, it's page 13. 13.
Yes, giving thanks, you know, it's a two-line poem. And it's another spring, another day, the pink blossom does it again. And I think the essence of the brevity of life is encapsulated in the structure of the poem, which is only and merely 2 lines. I think more would have been inappropriate. So there is a harmony, if you like, between the structure of the poem and the idea of the poem, which I really like. And the pandemic, of course, has made us all aware of the fragility of life and the brevity of life as well. My Sakura Tree in May, of course, is another poem about a cherry blossom tree. Pink and white are a balm for his weary eyes. And I think my father used to sing, poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. And when he did, he looked at me. And but I think Hugh McFadden sees the marvellous, if not the miraculous. I don't know where he is on the spiritual spectrum, but he certainly sees the marvellous in this beauty. And in the poem The Journey, which is on page 12, no, it's not page 12, or refocus the lens. I've lost the pages.
Journey is 17.
Yeah. Refocus the lens, you know, it says, don't be afraid of your human nature, you know even the Pope wears underwear. And I like the humour of that. I don't see it so much as irreverent, you know, an irreverence for the ecclesiastical office of the papacy, but rather a reverence for humanity. And in Memo to Rumsfeld and to Memo to Bush, Blair and Rumsfeld, we hear the potent political voice of the poet. He takes a position which I think, and you can correct me audibly now if I'm wrong, but left of centre. And if I'm wrong, I'll claim immunity from criticism as a postmodern reader, where my interpretation of what the author says is as valid as his intended meaning. So there you go. Anyway, Red Harbingers is about apples reddening, and they're harbingers of the coming of autumn, the changing season, and let me just turn to page 29. And I remember that we had an orchard at home, we had apples, and so this is very familiar to me when the apples would ripen and redden, and it was the end of summer and the start of autumn. And Green on Red, the very next poem, he talks about those apples turning to crimson, and he says the sight, both joyful and sad, is an exquisite melancholy. I think that's beautifully put, because it captures the feeling wonderfully. And when I say wonderfully, I don't just mean well, I mean wonderfully. There is a sense of wonder in that. And in September Song, you have that sense of melancholy carried over where the leaves are beginning to turn yellow. And there's a music. It's a moody melancholy, and there's a musicality in that poem as well. In Centenary Fever, we're all aware of the controversy about our president declining an invitation to an ecumenical service, which has become politicized. And this poem comes out of a place that I would describe as an ideological heart. I like people who have an ideological heart, people who stand for something, and it raises the question really about what do we stand for? In this, we've passed the centenary of 1916 now. I want to close, and I want to just turn to page 45. I wanted to just skim along and touch down on some of the points. I started with Redux. I'm going to close with Redux as well, because in A Butterfly's Farewell, which is about a requiem mass for Gay Byrne in the Dublin's Pro Cathedral, he talks about how a butterfly fluttered down and from the roof and from the nave and hovered over the coffin and flew away again and disappeared. And he tells us how the Aztecs believed that butterflies accompanied the souls of the dead out of this world. So we have this notion of redux. I would have ended the collection here, because you start with redux and it would have been a good place to close, I think, but I'm going to close with it anyway. Redux, the notion of redux, leading safely home again. And we're all reminded, as I said, of our mortality, that life is a journey, and on that journey, as the title suggests, we have company and we have partings and the hope of meeting up again sometime in the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kieran Beville. Ladies and gentlemen, Hugh McFadden.
Get close as you can.
Yeah, okay. Well, folks, it is great to be back. It's really wonderful to be back in Limerick and to be at a launch, a live event. There hasn't been one in Dublin either for ages, and I don't do Zoom really. And I really want to thank Kieran for that fascinating insight that you've given me about my own work. And I think what you had to say, you needn't worry that it wasn't accurate or it wasn't on the ball, because left of centre would be dead. Left of centre, no apologies. I'm going to begin with a poem in memory of Patrick Kavanagh. Because in many ways I think Kavanagh allowed me to believe that one could write about the ordinary. I had just started university. I was reading all these academic critics, but I was taken by Kavanagh's, I suppose you could say, spirituality. At his best, I think he's wonderful. And I mean wonderful. I couldn't have been inspired in the same way by someone like Yeats. What I mean is that he inspired me to believe that I could also try to write verse, try to write poetry, try to capture moments in time, like something like he did. So I begin because Kavanagh in the early 60s in Dublin was a living presence of what I consider to be a real poet, a genuine poet, the real Macaulay. The Academy might have been talking about Yeats and Wallace Stevens and God knows who else, Pound and Eliot. But I wanted someone, if you like, who was down to earth, who was also here at the time in Dublin, writing poems about the Grand Canal, that I was so familiar with. Just like Joyce comes alive for me because I live in Joycean territory, near where he was born, where he was baptised, where his father and mother were married, all within a short distance of where I live. Kavanagh made it appear natural to write poetry. to love poetry, to believe in poetry. So I'll begin with him, and then I'll go on to two people that I met at the same time as Cameron. So I begin with the poem Homage to Patrick Kavanagh. And this is the second poem in homage to Patrick Kavanagh. My previous collection of poetry ended with a rather similar verse. So I'm picking it up from that. Once more, I went down by the River Fane again on a sunny summer's day, below the old stone bridge at Inniskeen, following the Patrick Kavanagh way. And I sat by the flowing brown river, watching it flow, 11 years after my first visit one day in September in the year 2004, your anniversary, Patrick Kavanagh. On the day of my first visit, I saw a white butterfly flit by brown water. But on this day, it was an emperor butterfly I saw settle softly on the dew-wet grass by the river. It was a sign, another reminder. Marvels are seen in the ordinary. On that occasion, his centenary, I spoke about my encounters with Kavanagh. And the man who introduced me to Patrick was John Jordan, who at that time in 62-3 was lecturing in UCD in Erskine Terrace. And after one of his lectures, I spoke to John, and he asked me was I doing anything later. And as I wasn't, as a student, time didn't mean a lot. He said, well, come down to a particular pub at the bottom of Elisa Street at the corner of Stephen's Green, and I'll introduce you to a few people. And we went down there to O'Dwyer's Pub, as it was then called. And that's where I met Michael Hartnett. Michael had just come up from Limerick, County Limerick, to attend UCD. His first year's fees were paid by John Jordan, who was lecturing in English at the time. So I'd like to read one for Michael, seeing that I am in Limerick City. It's from a previous collection, so I do want to mark Michael Hartnett's hometown, home city. The lament for Michael Hartnett. From an early age, your voice was true, precocious, mature, prodigious, and a wonderful portent of a rare talent. I picture you in a pub in Lower Leeson Street in 1962, reciting your version of a delicate town, first written at 17. The excitement in your voice at capturing such beauty, a fabulous exotic thing, a strange bird flown into Dublin from the Far East. But you were from Limerick West, cruel, and remained faithful to your own dupus, the spirit of your own place, and people who you vowed you would not see go down. Sadness steals over my soul like a wave of darkness moving over lake or field as the sun goes behind cloud. Sad singing in darkness indeed. I hope your going wasn't lonely, and that the spirit of truth you honoured in poetry will grant you peace on the other side. He first showed me the draft of the Tower, which was published as a pull-out section in the magazine Arena by James Liddy and Michael edited a magazine called Arena, 4 issues. in 62 to 64. Now, the man who introduced me to Michael, of course, was John Jordan, who also introduced me to Patrick Kavanagh in two different pubs. In the case of Kavanagh, it was the Bailey, because he was in exile from MacDaid's by then. John MacDaid had come down from Donegal to do an annual check on the stocks and the money and what have you. And he found a pile of rubber checks upstairs, including several written by Patrick Kavanagh. And he instructed the barman, Paddy O'Ryan, not to cash any further checks by Patrick Kavanagh, whereupon Kavanagh took great umbrage and decamped with his followers to the Bailey. So John introduced me to Patrick in the Bailey, and because I had the right introduction, he deigned to talk to me. But I also spoke to him on various other occasions, including in Liz Henry's flat apartment in Dublin at the time, where we spent an afternoon or an evening. So I'd like to read a poem in memory of John Jordan, poet, critic, academic, actor, broadcaster, and a wonderful promoter of poetry. It was he who first published Michael Hartnett, Paul Darkman, MacDowell Woods, and a number of others. He was one of the earliest publishers of Seamus Heaney. I think he was the first publisher in Dublin. And it was a great shock when John passed away in June '88. To many people were shocked by his sudden departure. And a few days later, I wrote this poem called JJ. We spent a long evening talking about you, sometimes as though you had gone no further than on holiday. Hours later, alone, as the house settled into silence, I reread your lines from Miss Katie, the real Trinity. And I recalled you resting on my dreaming sofa, listening to Brunsey and the Blues, to Mississippi and to Lady Day as we went deeper south. You said, for the love of God, will you play me some Mozart? You know I'm a simple man. And then you smiled beatifically. So I love Mozart. I love blues. As you will gather from some of the poems in the current collection further on up the road. So I'd like to read one called Seeing Pink in a Dark World, and it is my cherry tree, our cherry tree, the sakura tree at the bottom, or back on in Dublin. Seeing Pink in a Dark World. Dublin, 7th of April 2017. It is important to praise the cherry tree, to praise its astonishing beauty. Too long have I gazed at all that is ugly. The arrogant pride of man is vanity. I'm reading Virgil under blossomed branches, thinking the world is full of war and madness. And in that same vein, a poem about war and peace called La Couche Memoriale. It is time to commemorate those who died in war, in the Trojan War, in the Punic Wars, and the Gallic Wars. Let us not forget all of those who died in the 9 Years' War, the 100 Years' War, and in the Peninsular War, the Franco-Prussian War, Crimean War, the Boer War in South Africa, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the wars in Iraq, and in Afghanistan, and Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Libya. Now, have we forgotten any? Yes, the 2 world wars. You remember those, and neither was great. It is time to commemorate peace. And on that subject, war, peace, revolution, whatever, a little anecdote from the past when, well, I think it would have been about 1971, perhaps, thereabouts, Dublin. And a certain militant individual who led a breakaway group from one of the main Republican outfits. You remember Behan's famous dictum that the first item on the agenda of all Republican meetings is the split. This is called Adventures in Looney Land. It was Bugs Bunny who asked me, would I go on active service? That was a Mickey Mouse idea. He thinks I'm Wile E. Coyote, but I'm really the great road runner. Bugs Bunny was a leading Republican at the time, and the nickname came from his rather prominent first and front tooth. The man is dead now. His first name was Rory. And the next poem I'd like to read is more contemporary. It's almost up to date, in fact. I'm still reading about these matters as our mainstream media are obsessed with both Russia and China. Page 24. It's called Circular Spying. Our spies are good. Your spies are bad. Our spies are good spies. Your spies are bad spies. We spy on you as you spy on us. Our spies kill only to protect good spies. Your spies kill only to protect bad spies. We're on the high moral ground. You're on the low moral ground. We only make nerve agents because you make nerve agents. You've got nerve making them. We keep our nerve making them. We're the opposite of you. You're the opposite of us. There are circles within circles. There are circles within circles. The next one is a poem that I wrote, not too long ago, about an occasion in London, way back. I think it might have been early summer '63. And it features someone from this town, from this city, who became rather well known in London as, not too long ago, about an occasion in London, way back. I think it might have been early summer '63. And it features someone from this town, from this city, who became rather well known in London as a photographer, as a fashion photographer. He became very, very successful. A man called Niall McInerney, who did the catwalks in London, Paris, Milan, New York. But at this time, in his early career, he hadn't really got into all of that. He was working, he was beginning to study photography, and he was working in a club in Seoul. And he told me before he left Dublin that when I was in London to call in to see him, there was a club called the Phoenix Club on Compton Street. and it was actually managed by a man from Limerick, who shall be nameless. It's called Soho Snapshot, page 28. The time is just after 12 noon, one summer's day in '63, and I'm climbing up the stairs of the Phoenix Club in Soho. I can hear music from a room, and the song is David Spender. At the top of the stairs, just beside the curtain door to the showroom, my friend Niall sits with his feet up on a second wooden kitchen chair, engrossed in reading a book. He is the club's stage manager. He's not expecting to see me, looking up at me with surprise. I ask him, "What are you reading?" "Paradise Lost," he replies. "What else?" September song, and going back to, I think, the sakura tree, the beautiful pink blossom tree, which is a huge tree now. It's grown all the time we've been in that house, and that's more than 40 years. And so it is now a very high and wide tree, and it's absolutely stunning in late April, mid-April, late April. Maybe if we're lucky with the weather, it lasts from mid-April to the beginning of May. Although I notice nowadays the blossoms come earlier, the buds blossom earlier than they used to. Climate change. Anyway, September song, page 31. A grey sky in late September. It's not always going to be this grey. Light drizzle falling on my garden. A cloudburst doesn't last all day. Looking out at all that greenery and noticing the first yellow leaves of autumn on my cherry tree, while listening to George Harrison's song of acceptance. All things must pass. All things must pass away. Yes, on a moody, melancholy day. On the subject of weather, I have a little poem here that was published in Limerick on the wall a few years ago, poetry in April. It's called Button Up Your Overcoat. And it was written during a very cold snap in Dublin, and I'm happy that's where here. With snow, a lot of snow, it's very cold. I was getting with us in Rathmines. On a bitterly cold winter's day, who should I see waiting for a bus in Rathmines? Only the weather girl, Siobhan, dressed entirely in jet black, wearing black tights, black skirt, black jacket. We sat beside each other on the bus. When is this cold snap going to end? I asked her. High pressure zone moving in. Not until Sunday, she said, smiling a smile that would melt a frozen snowman. Things will start to warm up on Sunday, she said. Eat your heart out, long time. Durkin wrote a poem about the very first after all. Yes, and the next one was alluded to by Kieran. It's called A Butterfly's Farewell, and it's set in the Cathedral at the funeral mass for Gay Byrne. I went along because, I don't know, it's not that I knew Gay Byrne very well, but I did work for a while in RT, and I knew some of the people there. And he also went to the same school that I went to in Dublin, and that's Synge Street. He went there, and so did Nathan Andrews, and so did various other broadcasters. We had a very, very good elocution teacher doing that. So that probably explains how all these people ended up on radio and television. butterflies for the theatre was packed to the rafters. I was glad to get in. 11th of November 2019. At the Requiem Mass for Gay Byrne in Dublin's Pro Cathedral, an orange-brown butterfly floated down from the roof of the nave, hovered over the coffin, flew away again, and disappeared. The Aztecs believed that butterflies accompanied the souls of the dead out of this world to eternity. And I'm going to finish with the first poem in the little collection. It's called Further On Up the Road. So I'll finish with the beginning. Further on up the road, the decks. You used to see me drinking at the bar, and may have thought I had a sweet tooth. But now it's a different story, dear. Much further on up the winding road. Way back then, the road seemed very dark, and the turning world seemed very cold. But I followed the sun and found the light much further on up the winding road. Maybe we'll meet again some sunny day, much further on up the road. Thanks a lot.
Is that